They only call me when they need me, and they need me only when things have gone really, really bad. Waking up in the middle of the night truly sucks, but waking up to hear a hysterical jerk on the other end is so much worse. I opened up with the standard, "What do you want?" The same thing anybody would say when you get called at about 1:45 in the morning. I hear the words, "I need you." What this time? "Check your emails. There's a set coordinates and time." Okay, I'll check it, but I also need to check my account. Don't forget, my services aren't exactly cheap. With that, I immediately hung up the phone. Living inside a bunker truly, truly sucks, but then again, a bullet to the head is a whole lot worse. I need to protect myself because Lord knows there's plenty that want me totally done because of what I can do. There are few of us around anymore. At least that's what happens, at least for now. Thankfully, people are waking up, people are understanding, and you can't put the lid on something once it starts boiling. Those that are in power, so to speak, either want those of us that can do what I do as complete slaves, or if they can't enslave us, we turn into that duck in that weird CGI movie that said, "We're dead. So very, very dead." This is how I stay alive. I stay hidden as best I can. I rotate around to different areas. Nobody knows where I am, and only certain people can contact me. My only communication is living on the deep web, as the dark web isn't good enough to keep me hidden. I know it almost cost me before. Rolling slowly out of bed, I move over to the other computer so I can check my account. Make sure it gets bounced around so they can't track me. The account that this man knows about, I checked, and sure enough, the money is good. I confirmed it multiple times, and I send a message to him, and I confirm that I'll take care of everything and tell him to just wait a little bit. After that, I immediately look over, and I seriously want to grab that bottle before I go. But I know I can't. I have to be clear for what's coming. I head over 2 rooms away, immediately after I relieve myself, of course. And there it is, inside the center of that room. That damn mirror, that damn Tokarev mirror, is sitting there like some sort of devil just waiting for me. As I walk up to it, I look through each of the spirals. This isn't some piece of junk you buy on Etsy or Amazon or anything. I had to build this. And just like when I built it, walking up is like walking into your worst nightmares every single time as the fear takes over, and yet you simply have to drive on. I can do this without the mirror, but it takes much, much longer. And sometimes I don't get as pinpoint accurate as I'd like to be. And, well, that can lead to bigger issues. And I do not want to be responsible for anything bad happening again. I have to live with the before. As I take my place on the chair, I begin my breathing exercises and my chanting. The harmonics go through the mirror and bounce back around. There, in the background, I can hear the audio kick on as the different types of frequencies start pulsating through. I can also hear the hiss of the tanks turning on, all of them set to activate as soon as I sit down. As Pure O3 starts filling the room, I continue my breathing and relax everything. I relax and let my mind find the location of those coordinates. I thought for a moment, and as I focused in, I could only think of one thing. Of course it had to be California. Again. Freaking morons. Looking at the clock in the room that I was in my mind's eye, I knew I was in the right spot, but I wasn't at the right time. I knew I was in the right spot because I could sure see the one who had just called me. In fact, I listened to his conversation for a little bit, talking about how he might have a lead later on, but he's not sure. There's a few people digging him for information, but thankfully he keeps his big mouth shut. As I look over again at the clock, I realize that I have to back it up, and I do so. And as I do, I back up and snap into the exact timeline. As I stand in that same room, I see a fat man bolted to the ground, as in literally bolted, as in somebody took metal rivets and actually slammed them several times through his hands, his arms, his feet, his legs, and even a few other places I don't even want to think of. He's on the ground screaming in pain as blood from the rivets are simply holding him to the ground as they drip down onto the floor. Around him in a circle is a whole bunch of self-proclaimed witches chanting as they simply stand there. I always find it a little hilarious how they all insist on dressing as though they're going to be sitting there whipping this man for his own humiliation and pleasure, or maybe just for Halloween. It doesn't matter. Only for a moment do I let my mind look them over, and some of them are quite decent to look at. Others, even in my astral form, made me shiver in disgust. They chant continuously, keeping the tones level as they should. The man screams in more pain as the cacophony of their chants reaches around. It seems as though they were smart and they allowed it to be in a room with great acoustics. I look closer and I can see a symbol has been carved underneath him into the concrete. As they continue to work, the symbol he's on begins to glow ever so slightly as the room begins to shake. If it wasn't for the fact I was in my astral form, you wouldn't be able to tell. Even your physical forms wouldn't be able to see this. The eyes are not designed for this. The nerves are not designed for this sort of shaking, although those that were not wearing any shoes might have felt something. The man on the floor tries to scream, but the gag is continuing to hold him. I wish I could cover my ears, because in my astral form I hear everything. I hear his screams of pain, of pleading, of someone to come and help him. Anyway, for him to get out of there. His tears roll down his face as he's completely in pain. He then defecates himself as the urine begins to pool on the floor, mixing in with the blood. As his screams get louder, the chanting begins to intensify. I've seen this before. Good old alchemy. It's a basic trade of flesh and life to create something else. And it rarely succeeds, as most people don't even know what in the hell they're doing. I've seen it enough times, I figured it out, but I never actually wrote anything down, as I don't want them to actually succeed. Because when it does, whatever they produce may be pretty, but is just evil incarnate. I've seen demon-ish things come out. One coven created a male that was simply covered all over, sticking in different parts, by different size genitalia. They enjoyed it very much, but pretty soon, as they enjoyed it, he suddenly made the genitalia about 6 feet long and skewered every single one of them. Enjoying the blood as it went around him, he actually died in his own ecstasy. When it fails, something still comes through, and is never spiritual, only interdimensional. This means whatever it is would be as frantic and as violent as we would be if we were thrown into their own area, their own dimension. You would lash out at the first thing because you didn't know what in the hell you're dealing with. And of course, the transfer over tends to adjust them a little bit. If they were trying for something spiritual, they require certain things. A willing host, or a pure sacrifice, willingly boast. And of course, those conducting said ritual must have pureness of good or evil. This is why I know I would most likely watch her and all of her friends die, no matter how many bodies had already been scooped up when I first entered this room. The man then seemed to deflate as I heard his screams fade, and then something grew inside him. The skin receded back, seemingly taking in all his body fat and then his muscle, and then it seemed that even his organs were gone, yet something was inside. It moved around and bulged and pushed on all sides, but not quite getting through the skin just yet. The women moved closer to see this thing hatched, yet they continued on their own chance. They didn't stop, it just kept going. After they took the 2 steps forward, they stopped and waited. And suddenly, with a quick motion, something shot out, piercing the closest woman. It pierced her right in the chest, and she seemed to no longer even be breathing at that point. I wondered if this was poison or something like that, as she just simply slumped, but her body still stood. Then her body seemed to dry out, as in all the fluids were being drawn out of her body. Then, whatever the hell had shot into her body pulled itself out, and the body simply fell back, and then it shattered as it hit the ground. As it did all this, whatever was inside the husk of that man was growing bigger. One by one, each of the witches seemed to fall prey, not even seeming to care when each one was killed right in front of them or right next to them. Even though they were skewered, they never screamed. Even as their bodies were drained of all their vital fluids, they didn't do anything. This thing inside continued to get bigger and bigger inside the fat man's skin until there was only one female remaining. This female was the youngest, far too young to be there. She continued chanting as this thing ripped out of the skin cocoon it had been in. Rising up out of the skin was this large mass, like a long, giant maggot that has tiny, tiny little legs on its ventral side. 4 rows, in fact, that stretch all the way down, and it's though it just woke up as they seemed to stretch out from side to side, making sure they work. Sticking out of the center of its back was a single large tendril, but it wasn't like any type of tentacle like an octopus. No, this was segmented in some way to give it rigidity. This is what had ended all the females except for one. Without a word, the female seemed to look at this, trying to be not afraid, but I could hear the screams of her soul in my ears as she simply sat down, leaned back, and opened her legs. I looked and thought, look, you could have at least shaved for this, but whatever, it's not going to matter much soon. The creature seemed to look at her without eyes, crawled over to her with the dozens of tiny, spiky legs, paused only slightly before it climbed onto her. It seemed as though she was waiting for it to do something particular. Then, as she closed her eyes and tilted her head back just a little bit, this thing opened its maw, almost like where the nose would be. A giant circular opening began to get very, very wide, with talon-like teeth around the outside. Since her eyes were closed, she didn't realize what was coming as it enveloped her head. The last sound she made before I heard bones crack was a muffled scream. It then slowly swallowed her like a snake eats a frog. The tendril, the whole time, moving back and forth like a dog's tail when it's happy. I continued to analyze this thing as it ate the victim. Nothing I could do as an astral form except look and listen. Besides, this was hours ago, and there's not much I can do, and even if I could, allegedly, do something, anyone finding out that I could adjust time, well, that would put an even bigger bullseye on my chest. I followed this thing as it crawled from the basement to the main floor. Then it found its way out of the house and crawled for most of the night. As the first glimmer of sunlight came up, it just decided to climb the biggest tree it could, and then it began to cocoon itself. A little trick I learned: I could fast forward time as though we're doing some sort of time lapse on a video game, and I watched it simply create a cocoon of itself, and it stayed there. I realized there was something about light that made it do this. I knew that meant they had hours to find it, and that is when I willed myself to return to the present. Upon returning, I grabbed the first of two particular items that I kept next to the chair every time I entered this damn mirror. The first was a bucket. I pulled it in front and proceeded to empty my entire stomach. I continued to dry heave for several minutes, forcing everything out. I swear, once the acid was out, I felt bile, and I swear I pulled everything all the way up from the bottom. The way bottom. After that, I grabbed the second item, which was mouthwash, because seriously, who wants to taste that? After composing myself of the whole ordeal, I immediately got up, left that mirror as quickly as I could, as my legs are always wobbly afterwards, and immediately sent a message sending the coordinates along with an actual map. This would allow them to find it quickly. I also gave a very good description of the creature itself with all the measurements I could find, and recommending how to deal with it, starting of course with a strategic nuke, and then working my way down. After I sent the email, I double-checked to make sure that he didn't stiff me on the bill by taking the money back. Realizing that everything was good at this point, I proceeded to grab another item I kept close. I opened the seal and upended an entire bottle of Russian vodka directly into my empty stomach, and I went to bed. I wanted to sleep. I wanted to forget everything I just witnessed. I didn't want to deal with any of that anymore, which is why I charged so much. It's not just the bullseye on my forehead, but the fact that I've seen people taken apart in some of the most gruesome ways possible, and there's not a damn thing I'm able to do about it, not without making sure that I'll never be able to help again. I said the same thing I always say: just another day in this life. Then, before the alcohol hits, a vision suddenly hits me and I stop in my tracks. A vision of things happening soon, within several days perhaps. I run through the vision over and over, hitting it in memory, trying to see if there's anything else. Almost like a dream when you first wake up, running it over and over and over in your head, trying to remember the finite details. And as I remember some of the finer details, I simply say, damn, it's time to move again. Hello everybody, this is Syntax. Thank you for joining me on the creepier side of this channel. Being that it's October, it's time for the creepy stories to return. Before I go, I need to send some special thank yous to a few of my supporters, and those will be The Lockeen, MTF Guard, SS Demon, Erica Gem, Guardian Sage, Brian Kemp, Chris Dixon, and Cause Lynn. Thank you all so much for supporting the channel. And everybody else, I will see you on the next one. This is Syntax, ejecting.